Hello and welcome to Deep Dive with me, Mitali Mukherjee. On July 18th, 2021, the Pegasus project and its revelations shocked the world. A collaborative effort by many media organizations, including The Wire in India, The Washington Post in America, and The Guardian in the UK, revealed a chilling surveillance attack. Pegasus was a software that had been developed by an Israeli group called the NSO Group. Reports seem to indicate that it was governments indeed that had made the purchase of this cybersecurity hack and were using it on those they wanted to keep tabs on. A zero tap hack, that's what Pegasus is about. It enters your phone, it accesses your private photos, personal conversations, and almost every detail that you would want to keep private. Here in India, several journalists, academicians, not for profit organization heads, and many others, including lawyers and opposition members, found their phones infected and found that Pegasus had been used to survey on them and to access their details. Once infected, your phone becomes your worst enemy. Amnesty International Security Lab conducted digital forensic tests on phones and found indeed that they had been targeted and infected by Pegasus. The Pegasus project itself was a collaboration by journalists from 17 media organizations across 10 countries. All this was coordinated by Forbidden Stories. Sandrine Rigaud, the editor of Forbidden Stories and the woman who coordinated the Pegasus project, joins me now to talk about what 1 year post Pegasus looks like, the challenges, and whether any ground has been covered. Sandrine, thank you for joining me. In a way, it's a landmark occasion to have reached a 1 year mark to the Pegasus project. And first and foremost, congratulations on having driven such an intense project across 10 countries. How are you feeling 1 year down the line in terms of how much ground has been covered post the revelations of that investigation?
Thank you very much for inviting me. Yes, it's been exactly 1 year since the publication. It was quite an important investigation and a dangerous one to coordinate and to lead, because we had to work in almost secrecy for months. But I think a year after, we all realized how impactful this investigation was. And even today, we are still learning about new infection. We have read this report from Citizen Lab about 30 new infections revealed in Thailand, and one more in Belgium, the nephew of Paul Rusesabagina, Rwanda's opponents, who's the hero of Hotel Rwanda. So a lot is happening every day, new infections, new informations about potential clients. There were the Apple notifications that happened after our revelations that really helped us understand the scale of the targeting of either political opponents or journalists or activists all over the world, and with the discovery of new countries. So a lot has happened, and we've tried at Forbidden Story to synthesize all the information available in a map, because we felt that even ourselves were getting a bit lost in the flow of information about Pegasus, its clients, and its victims.
Yeah. What would you say in retrospect? Because at that time, as you said, you were scouring through reams of data and there were just hundreds of names coming out in terms of having had their phones infected. What would you say was the most pivotal outcome of the Pegasus project? Because, here in India, I think it was the fact that it brought out front and center the fact that there was surveillance happening, that people's phones were infected. For the first time ever, there was proof of it, and there was a list of people that looked like, I'm saying that because this is still under litigation, they were persons of interest for the government in power.
Well, I mean, the revelations we did were confirmed even by French authorities or Belgian authorities. So today there is no debate about the infections themselves and the revelations we published. But of course, there are still investigations ongoing, even in India, with the Supreme Court working on that. So a lot will come. But I think what really changed with the Pegasus project is that it opened a discussion on cyber surveillance all over the world, and people started to realize the scale of the misuse of this kind of tools. For the moment, there were, I mean, until last year, and July 18, there were sometimes some reports of Amnesty's International Security Lab or Citizen Lab, but nothing as big as international as what we did last July with Amnesty International Security Lab. So I think people started to see who were the victims behind the targeting. It was not something theoretical anymore. We had names. We showed that if you were a journalist living in Azerbaijan or in India or in Mexico, you were a potential and a very high probable target of this kind of spyware. If you were a political opponent, if you were a human rights lawyer. So everywhere we were seeing the same schemes, and we were naming people, we were naming the victims. So I think this changed the perception of the danger and how basically close it was to us, because it can reach you as a journalist, but it can reach your family, it can reach people who are living with you. So everybody is in a way concerned.
Yeah, and just to scratch that point, because you mentioned at the start as well that it's probably been one of the most dangerous projects that you've undertaken and driven. What did you see as the primary threat?
Well, to be very honest with you, when we contacted the CIDART, for example, or MK Venue from The Wire, we wanted to work with them because, I mean, they were the best investigative journalists for us. We wanted to partner with them, but we also contacted them because we knew they were appearing on the list. We knew they were potential targets. And they were among the first people we contacted when we started to work on that, because we knew we could trust them. So we tried to convince them to have their phone analyzed, but of course we could not have done this using our phones or their phones. So we had to find a very complicated way to get in touch with them without calling them directly on the phone, because we knew that they were potentially still under surveillance, which was basically the case of MK Avenue when we did that. And we didn't want to ourselves be in return under surveillance, because we knew that we were going to work on that story for months. So we really had to be very inventive in creating new way of communicating. And so I remember very well that first call with Siddharth, trying to not telling him everything because we could not, but trying to convince him to basically just upload the content of his phone and let us analyze it, which is, I mean, not an easy thing to do when you're a journalist, when you have sources to protect, but he trusted us. And we were able to confirm with Siddharth's phone that people who were appearing on the lists were actually real targets, because we could see the signs of infections in Siddharth's phones. So we knew that what we had was very solid, very concrete. We then convinced Siddharth to be part, and it was not very complicated. He already understood the scope of the project to be part of the consortium with the Wire, and so we worked with the Wire. But we knew that journalists from the Wire were themselves targets. So we had to be very, very careful, because I mean, we knew that this spyware was already among us, and so we cannot say what device we used or how we communicate, but I can tell you that it was the most secure system I've ever put in place for an investigation like that.
I apologize for a drill going off in somebody's house somewhere. It's just suddenly there's like a drill going through my brain. I'm hoping it'll stop very soon. Let me move on to your India observations specifically. I think the other thing that stood out for us as we were analyzing the story was the sheer breadth of names that were being pulled out of that list. There were civil rights activists, there were journalists, of course, like you said, there were opposition members, and there were also lawyers of people who were fighting cases. Did you see this kind of breadth in any other region when you were looking at how Pegasus had been sort of spread?
Um, I think probably the Indian case was quite close of the Mexican story. Mexico was clearly in our data the client, and we actually know that there were more than one agency operating Pegasus in Mexico, but Mexico was the client that was selecting the more numbers for potential surveillance, more than 15,000. So that was quite huge. And Mexico, like India, is a democracy. So you should have systems that prevent you from misusing this kind of tools. But I mean, we see how this went far in Mexico, but it was in 2016, 2017. And what we saw in Mexico was the targeting, for example, of the driver of the president, of his sons, of his wife, of I don't know, his hairdresser was not on the list, but you can find people who were just working for him. It's something that was very, very close to what happened in India, where you're seeing that tool used according to the data and the analysis we did without any limit. So we'll see how this goes, but we know that there were confirmation that deals were made between India and Israel, that India is a very certain client of Pegasus. So we hope that with the institutions that are in place in India, we can have more answers in the months to come.
As you said, Sandrine, at this point, there are cases pending against the NSO group in France, India, Mexico, Poland, Spain as well. I think a PEGA committee has been set up in the EU. Here in India, we have a parliamentary standing committee that's still looking into, the findings and deliberating on it. But what struck those who are watching the case very carefully as a warning sign was that when the Apex Court was hearing the case, the Solicitor General actually indicated that national security concerns might prevent the government from publicly disclosing whether or not it had bought Pegasus. Do you see that as the big sort of red flag for other countries as well, and for India especially?
Yeah, I mean, this is very, very classical. Whenever we try to investigate this kind of tool or the misuse of cyber surveillance tools or weapons, even, I mean, national security's arguments are often used by the governments, by the agencies, just not to communicate and be transparent on that. But yeah, we hope that with the investigation ongoing in the EU, with the pressure of some companies, some Silicon Valley companies like Apple or even Meta, with WhatsApp being very very active on that front, we hope that this will put enough pressure on governments, on institutions to at some point start answering some just very basic questions like are you a client of NSO? Do you buy Pegasus? I mean, I think the Indian authorities haven't even answered that question for the moment, which is crazy. But in the same time, very few governments have answered that question in the EU. So I mean, this is really the national security card is something that has been used by any governments everywhere, and I think we still have a lot to do to have some more questions on the, I mean, just on the name of the clients. I mean, it's amazing that we still don't know who the clients are. We thought in France we revealed that the president Emmanuel Macron was himself selected for potential surveillance by a Moroccan client of Pegasus. But of course, this would have led to a very open conflict if France was going to use that information. So instead of being transparent, the French government has tried to to discuss, I think, very discreetly with the Moroccan authorities to have their own answers, but didn't want to make that public. So we have very few leverage, even here in France, where our government was targeted to obtain answers to our questions.
I'm not sure if the team has had the time and resources to continue tracking this across the world, but how likely would it be, you would say, that the Pegasus spyware still exists in phones and is still, running around doing its job?
I think it's been complicated right now for NSO, for the company NSO. I mean, they have their situation is quite complicated since publication. According to the information we've read, they don't have new clients, and it's very interesting because today there was this graph published by Citizen Lab of infections in Thailand. They have analyzed the phones of activists, and all that was put in a graph. And you see that clearly after the Pegasus project, there was a phase where Pegasus was not used by the governments because it was afraid probably of the consequences. But then it started to be used again. We still don't know how many governments use Pegasus. But what will happen is that even if Pegasus disappear or even if it's sold to another company, you have other spyware companies that are going to sell the same kind of product to the same governments. So we know that there has been other Israeli companies very active since the Pegasus project publication, because they're trying to get the markets NSO will lose.
Yeah, that's the question I was coming to actually, because it seemed like a victory when the NSO group was put on the entity list by the United States. It's not exactly banned, but it makes running business far more difficult for them. But now reports seem to indicate that another US defense contractor company might actually be buying the Pegasus software. Are you a bit frustrated by how many walls this hits and the fact that there is an establishment or a system that more or less is actually protecting or has its hand over this kind of cyber surveillance, software? They want it, and they're going to ensure that it stays around.
Yeah, I mean, of course, and this is the way governments and I mean, when you see the spyware market is very close to the weapon market. What happens in trying to organize the weapon sales and trying perhaps to establish some rules around weapon sales is probably happening right now with the spyware in the spyware market, with more light shed on the abuse of those kinds of tools. But of course, we're not naive. Those kinds of solutions and those kinds of problems are not solved in a month period or even in a year. It will take time. Governments will still need that kind of tool just to fight terrorism or to find drug trafficking. I mean, it's probably spyware like that are still a useful tool. So they will be sold to governments. The question is, to who do you sell those spywares, those tools? When do you sell to a country like Saudi Arabia or Azerbaijan? Can you really expect those countries to respect just human rights basic standards? It's very complicated, and this is what NSO was saying. It was saying, well, we have some rules. We make sure our clients respect those rules, but we see what happens. So I think there will be a need for more discussion, probably, and things will, I hope, evolve in a better way. But this will not take a year or two. It might take 5 or 10 years to come to an outcome that may do things a little better and not solve all the problems, of course.
Yeah. What were the most chilling names that came through when you started going through the India list? Which ones made you sit back and think, okay, this is getting really serious?
Um, well, when we started to see people close to the Dalai Lama, I mean, I remember Phineas in our team starting to find the entourage of the Dalai Lama and thinking, oh my God, does the Dalai Lama has a phone? How could we check his phone? I mean, the Dalai Lama didn't have a phone, but we started, we had that. I mean, after we've seen Emmanuel Macron and the Dalai Lama, I mean, the next target on the list could be. I had a friend who was making a joke when he was reading the list of targets, saying, "Well, is the next one Jesus Christ?" Because it was becoming really huge with all these names and no limit.
Yeah.
You can expect some political opponents to be targeted, and even that was very surprising. The scale of it was surprising in India, but every name appearing was a surprising name. We've seen journalists we were in contact with in the past. We've seen people that were in our contact books. I mean, this was also very shocking. Whenever you see somebody who you are communicating with, it's creating a shock.
Yeah. Just one final question, Sandrine. I take your point that to expect a global moratorium on cyber surveillance softwares is perhaps too idealistic at this point. But a lot of people in India tried to defend the Pegasus investigation by oversimplifying it, by saying, this has always existed. People's phones have always been tapped. There's nothing very special about what's happening over here. For an ordinary citizen or an ordinary viewer to understand the enormity of what happened and the how wily the software is, really, because it's not always about a click, right? It just makes its way into your phone and can start accessing information. What would you say to somebody to understand the seriousness of how intense this cyber surveillance is today?
I mean, imagine all what you put in your phone. For me, it's everything. I think you have more secrets in your phone that you're sharing with your husbands, with your children. For a journalist, a phone is the place where you centralize the discussions with your sources, people who take risks for you. It's the place where you have the photos of your kids. It's a place where you have everything gathered in the same place, and then you give some agencies, governments with the shady agendas, the means to get in your phone without leaving any traces, without any click. So Pegasus was entering in your phone using failure vulnerabilities in applications like WhatsApp. So before you could have a missed call on WhatsApp, and it could be the entry point of Pegasus. Now it's even more discreet than a missed call. So you give everything, and you don't have to be an investigative journalist to be targeted. You can be the husband, the son, the best friend of a journalist to be yourself targeted. I remember being in touch with Carmen Aristegui, a very famous journalist in Mexico, who was also our partner in that project and who was herself targeted. She discovered the name of her sister in the list, the name of her best friend. Her son has been targeted a few years earlier, and he was not even 18 at that time. So, I mean, everybody around a journalist, around a lawyer, around a political a political figure could be targeted, and more dangerous than that, it's when you see the profile of the victim, it's clearly the democracy that is endangered. I mean, people who are targeted are people who are trying to make things move for the better. Human rights activists, lawyers, they're people who are taking risk, who are, some of them are today in jail, some of them have been threatened, some of them have been killed even in Mexico. So these are the kind of people who are targeted. So if we're not taking care of that, at some point, our democracies will be themselves endangered, and this is what I want people to understand in what we did.
Yes, no, absolutely. And the fact that there is an all powerful state that is only growing more powerful thanks to cyber surveillance. Thank you for joining in. I think it's a remarkable milestone to have gotten to this point and to be talking about everything the investigations revealed. And I'm sure we'll see far more fantastic work coming from you and your team. Thank you again for joining in and speaking with me.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.